Good evening, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to our third appointment of the webinar, Education and Communion and Global Compact on Education, promoted by the Master's Level course in the Culture of Unity, and with the address of Culture of Communion for a Culture of Peace of the Sophia University Institute. I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Irene DePina, a student of the course of studies in Trinitarian ontology here at Sophia. And this afternoon, I'll have the pleasure of accompanying you and accompanying our guests in this seminar. So a special greeting to all the participants, men and women, both within the webinar, as well as those that are following us by streaming on a YouTube channel. Before entering into the direct in our seminar, just mention some technical things to help all of us to follow in the best way possible. For those who are connected by Zoom, I remind them of the possibility to follow through the simultaneous translation in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, simply by clicking on in the lower right and the Zoom, choosing the language you prefer. And furthermore, I want to let you know that you can transmit questions during the talks by our guests, and answers will be given in the session dedicated to that by utilizing the section that's put aside for questions and answers in the Zoom channel, or else in the chat of the YouTube channel. And answers will be given in a time opportune moment. Finally, I showed you briefly the way the seminar will unfold. There will be contributions by our guests in the order: Professor Federico Rovea, Professor Amy Ullman, and Professor Maria Teresa Siniscalco. We'll give them time at the beginning and then time for questions. It can be addressed through the ways that I said earlier. Precisely, I forgot to mention to indicate that the chat for the Zoom will not be utilized for questions, but only if there are some technical issues to be submitted to the direction. At this point, we can enter into the topic that we'll talk about this afternoon: peace and intercultural dimension in law, and we're going to give the word to our guests. So I welcome Dr. Federico Rovea, who will be the first to give us his contribution. And before giving him the word, I introduce briefly, he's a professor responsible for education and peace, intercultural dimension at the Sophia University Institute, and he's a collaborator with the University of Trent to teach philosophy of education. He obtained his doctorate in research in education in general and intercultural dimension at the University of Padua, and his master's degree with double title in Trinitarian ontology and philosophy at the Sophia University Institute and the University of Studies at Perugia. His research is concentrated on the educational theory, contemporary, and elements of intercultural education. I thank Professor Rodavea for being here with us today, and I give the microphone to him. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. And because I see it's the afternoon, because I see that there are connections from many places in the world. Therefore, for whoever it's the morning, good morning. Welcome to everyone. Thank you to Irene for the introduction and the presentation. Well, I would like to make a brief promise before offering you some brief reflection, which I prepared for today. And the premise is this brief talk today, I would like it to be twofold, a bit twofold, you could say. because in reality, my formation is twofold. Because as Irene already indicated, I come from a philosophical formation. And then I had this very interesting opportunity during my studies for my doctorate to put at the service the philosophical formation at the service of the educational field, discovering as a result that this interaction between philosophy and education is important and very rich with interesting suggestions. So I'd like to propose to you, offer today a brief reflection, theoretical reflection, which can help us to think or to think again about the intercultural dimension for our time, the time that we're living today. More in particular, I would like to utilize a metaphor to speak about intercultural education. The metaphor, because among the different conceptual tools between in the tool case that we can use to speak about intercultural education, it seems to me the metaphor is one of those most useful ones. Why? Because the metaphor makes it possible for us to dwell in a narrative, a situation, an account, which is particular, singular, in which we can recognize, see ourselves. At the same time, the metaphor makes it possible for us to not stop at what's there, but to open up the account towards a wider significance, a more universal meaning. Nevertheless, this meaning is not given, it's not already defined, but instead it's left to the listener or whoever is reading the task of finding their own way. In a certain way, it's indicated, some possibility is indicated, but then it's not defined. So I am very much in love with the educational metaphors because I believe that it's a tool to accompany, to suggest reflection without being closed in, without giving too tight, demanding indications. And so I think today it's important for whoever works with, whoever wants to think about education, to open up some space of things, room for things like this, for open reflection, which perhaps may not come from any place. It may be a reflection, which is a kind of end in itself, but which helps us to give a deep reading of reality, with a deep look on what exists, what we have around us. Good. Entering into the particular thing, the metaphor that I would like to introduce to you to think together about the intercultural dimension today, in reality is very simple. And it's the image of walking, a very everyday, routine, common image, which I believe all of us can experience. In particular, the image of walking in the city, image of walking inside of our city. Each of us can think of their own. In particular, I will use as a reference point, you could say, an account of a walk, which is a text that I love very much, which is a text by Father Michel de Certeau, a Jesuit and a French theoretician of last century. And it's within his book, maybe his most famous book, which is entitled The Invention of Everyday. It offers precisely an account of a walk, an account of a walk in a city, which is used, as we'll see, as a metaphor to talk about something else. It's a very rich text. I would like to present it to you and offer some reflections starting from this text. Well, first of all, the choice of a account of walking to talk about education. First of all, because walking is already contained within the term education. Because etymologically, This is well known almost in almost all the courses of education. They begin with this emphasis that the word education comes from Latin educere. One of the possible interpretations is to pull out, to draw out. To educate is to draw out. However, rarely do we dwell on what this drawing out means. Most of the time, there's an interpretation which is given. How could you say, almost psychologizing this drawing out, almost as if the task of educating was that of helping the person to draw out from him or herself their own potential, their own talents, to make them bear fruit, what's possible, what can be done. As if the one who teaches, the educator, had this task of going to draw out of the person something. I like very much instead to turn this around, this perspective, and think that educate, that is drawing out, as if it's the act of drawing out the person from the place in which they may be, to help, therefore, whoever is entrusted to us to come out from their pre-knowledge beforehand, the preconcepts, what they know or think they know, in order to go ahead towards something else. And that's why it's not pulling out from the person, but pulling the person himself out, accompanying someone precisely in the beginning of a walk. And this interpretation, it also has a historical confirmation, because in the history of the education discipline, the educator originally in classical Greek was not so much the teacher as we're accustomed to thinking, or the educator in the general sense. The educator had a very specific role as a slave, in other words, a person at the service of a family, whose task was that of taking the children and accompanying them to school. And that's why it was a profile, a figure, that it was agreed his task was accompanying a journey in the physical sense of the term, that is to accompany the child in that walk, that journey that brought him outside of the house, which is also symbolically very important. This figure, the one who accompanies outside of the home domestic environment, the security of the family, and helps him to go along that way that leads him then to the school. In other words, the public room, the encounter with the others, the encounter with society, which, however, was precisely the one who accompanies the journey. Not that he teaches or offers something, but he accompanies a movement. So, passing instead to the other account of the journey that I wanted to offer to you, which is that by Michel de Certeau, this very great theoretician, French theoretician. The journey that he talks about, the walk he talks about, is again an extremely educational, informative walk, journey. It's a walk that the author himself had done. It's a walk, it's autobiographical, what he shares. And he tells about a trip that was done by the author de Certeau in New York. And how is this walk developed? How does it develop? Michel de Certeau's walk is centered around 2 points of view. Because in his visit to the city of New York, first of all, this author is on the top of the World Trade Center, because this text is from 1984, and the World Trade Center was still in its place. There hadn't been all of the tragedy of September 11th. And that's why this account opens up with the vision of the city of New York from on high, the top of these towers. It's a vision also from the literary point of view, it's marvelous. So And if you want to go and read it, I suggest to everyone because it's a fascinating reading. The description of this city, a piece seen from on high, and seeing the city from on high becomes, for Michel Dicertot, the physical representation of a certain way of knowing. Of that way of knowing, precisely from on high, a way of knowing the reality in being detached, precise, that looks at the world like a map in which there are all the little elements that are static, and with a look I can control them. In front of my look, it's flat. And I don't belong to it because I'm an observer. I stay at the top of the tower. I look from on high. And this already, I begin to say, but I'll pick it up again at the end, makes us think of a certain way of educating, trusting perhaps in an excessive way that one believes that one of the great temptations of our time to trust in a blind way the prepackaged methodologies, to the methods, the kits that teach us how we should do, how we should teach, how we can help to grow. There are maps in these kits. They're maps that may give us the illusion of having everything under control, to look and to have in front of our look a precise map. So this account of Michel Dercetot develops when the author comes down from the tower and he starts walking and he gets lost in the city. Clearly his outlook changes because it's no longer that outlook from on high where he sees and controls everything. It becomes a partial view. It becomes an outlook, which I like this word very much, which is committed to the reality, because it's no longer that look that can control. It's a look, an outlook that's situated. If we think also of the experience of the great cities as it changes, to see it from on high, instead to feel small in the midst of the skyscrapers that block the view. You can only see a little portion. At the same time, that little portion becomes infinitely rich with details. All those details, all those parts of the city that seeing from on high you're not able to see. In this perspective and walking, of being lost in the midst of the streets of the city, makes it possible for us, I think it helps us to think of another side of education. Educating precisely as a commitment, like committing ourselves, like putting in play oneself, and oneself rather, not also, but primarily putting oneself in play as a body, inasmuch as physical, which commits himself in front of someone and something, he puts himself in play. And also he accepts the partiality of his own outlook. He accepts the fact that he's immersed in a reality which cannot be dominated from on high, a look from on high. Rather, even if in reality that look from on high, the outlook on the map is useful because technically it's very useful. Rather, it's not to be demonized, I don't think, in any way, because you have an idea of where one's going. Perhaps it's even necessary. It's necessary, however, just the same, to have the courage to come down and walk along the street and to accept that partiality, that situation, the fact of, yes, not being in control. I marked in reality 4 points, and then I'll conclude and we'll stay perfectly on time. 4 points of this account, this twofold account of looking at a city from on high and walking along the streets. 4 points for reflection, which I think are important to think and above all to do, to educate today. And they're these, which I already said, but I'm going to emphasize them again. The first is this image of involving the total involvement of the person. Therefore, involving the body, not just the head, but the body, the sensations, the affective dimension, the total person with the other and with his reality. The second is tightly connected with the first. It's the possibility to come out from one's own privileged position, to come down from the tower, to use the image, which also, in as much as the educator is a teacher, whoever has this profession, it's a temptation at the door to put oneself in a position of privilege with respect to the people that are entrusted to us. Whereas instead, I think that this account can help us to think precisely of this movement of coming down from the privileged position to put ourselves next to. The third point is that this image makes it possible for us to think how our outlook on the others and on reality is renewed when it's put in play. When walking along the street, we have the possibility to see angles, corners, spaces, room, which otherwise would have been closed off from us. So it enriches our experience, even of being able to indicate to the others the beautiful elements which otherwise would have stayed invisible to us, but because from on high of the tower, you're not able to see it. And finally, this metaphor of walking makes it possible for us also to think how our commitment with reality is not just a possibility for us individually and for people that are entrusted to us, but it's also a possibility to renew the world, to renew things, because committing oneself to the world, it forms not only the one who makes a commitment, but also forms a world, the space itself that's around us that can grow, can really be re-educated through our putting ourselves in play with this. So to conclude, in the light of these points, which may be a bit confused, but I hope they're useful, I believe that today, also from the great complexity of texts that we go through, reflection, the metaphor, but also like in this sense, dwelling in an account, they are very useful tools precisely to educate our outlook, to dwell in reality in a deeper way that's present, and therefore to be able to transmit this presence and this depth to whoever's entrusted to us and whoever's around us. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rovea. Certainly, they were not confused points, but very clear and linear. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I give the microphone to Professor Amy Ullman, who will rapidly present. Besides being the title of the course, Ethics in Professional Life here at Sophia, besides teaching that, she's the professor of professional life and a special advisor to the dean at Georgetown Law School in Washington, D.C. She's a senior research fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion and Peace and World Affairs. She has a degree in American Studies and Jurisprudence, and she followed a doctorate of research in law at Georgetown University. She has a degree in theology at Fordham University, and among her publications, more recent publications, I remember 5 Steps to Healing, 5 Steps to Positive Political Dialogue, both edited by New City Press. Now I invite Professor to take the microphone, and I thank her already for her contribution. Thanks very much. I'm really happy to be able to follow this very beautiful explanation of the image that we can work really. So with this, I wanted to invite you to take a walk in my city where I live, which would be Washington. I work 6 blocks from the Capitol, and I am teaching precisely in this field. I take as a starting point the experience here, but they're the same methods that I use for lessons on ethics and professional life at Sophia. But the background for the work here is polarization, which is very intense. And also, as perhaps you followed, a very high level of tension here and difficulties with racism. So the images of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, the protests, and the politicization of the response to the pandemic. So it was 2.5 semesters that we're teaching with Zoom. So it also leads to a whole other complexity. So really, upon the invitation of Federico, I wanted to look and see when we come down and enter into this. It reminds me of the top of the World Trade Center. He was taking pictures with the hands trembling, but then coming down and looking on the streets, then you see a lot of things that you can trip over, obstacles for our students that are entrusted to us. I work above all with adults. They're about 25 years to give more context. So to think for a moment, what is the impact of this environment, which is so tense, on the outlook, the experience of students? I see there's a great lack of clarity in the relationships, of fear, very sharp fear of either judging or being judged by the others. And there's this obstacle to our interaction with social media, which lead to a way of seeing oneself in a very careful way, which then makes it difficult to create an environment of conversation, of learning, of research, of reinventing ideas. So this work of education, of pulling out, drawing out, becomes quite complex because of the fear of making a mistake or of wounding someone or the other. Then this year, above all, there is the distraction, the tired fatigue, exhaustion, fear. So there are thousands of reasons that make it difficult. Just the dimension of putting ourselves in play. So it's difficult to have a sincere conversation in the lesson because of all of these difficulties and all of these fears and sensitivities. Also, at times, it seems to be super sensitivity, but you can understand this as well. So, what can be done? How can we do in this environment? So, what I would also like building again on what Federico gave us, to recognize before anything else my own limitation, which and then also in teaching at Sophia, there's no way that I could have a horizon to take in, to comprehend the cultural diversity deep questions that the students bring. It wouldn't even be minimally possible. And with my students, also with a great spectrum of diversity, political diversity, religious diversity, cultural diversity, geographical diversity, also from different places in the world, but also diversity within the US, the cultural diversity. There would not even be the way, you couldn't even dream of a way that I could have all the elements to be able to grasp these elements. So what the students ask to be done before our lessons, reflecting on material that's chosen, obviously, is what they want is to, I ask them to write before entering into the class. And this has some different reasons. One is that it gives me a look, an outlook, a bit more inside, not only what they're thinking, what are their questions, but also what are the obstacles they have in understanding and bringing ahead a conversation. To give them some room, let's say a bit private, let's say with the professor, in which they feel that they can perhaps play a little bit more with their ideas. And then on the basis of this writing, I try to see, to put on the table and altogether an agenda for our discussion, which then also helps them to see what are the links are among them. So above all, in a Zoom, creating groups, breakout rooms, groups in which they can speak with each other more in depth. And they say the magic number is small, 3 or 4 for these groups, but that they perhaps enter into the lesson thinking, who knows, maybe I'm the only one with this question or this problem or this obstacle deep down. But also to see that perhaps there are questions which are shared with others that they didn't imagine that there would be a possibility of being connected. So what does this cooperation do? For me as a professor, it helps me to come down from the tower and to decentralize the lesson, that it's not aimed just on my own interests, my questions, my agenda as a person, as a limited person, but it helps me to move the center of our classroom to the interests and the questions, and at times also the obstacles the students have. And then a further step ahead is to see that they can meet one another beyond the fear, beyond the fear of judging or being judged. They can meet one another in the shared questions that they have. Then it's up to them to choose how to present their ideas in the more public environment deep down. But after having done a bit of this operation, to see the possibilities of finding one another. So obviously, there's not una bacheca magica, una pillola magica che viene fuori ugualmente le intenzioni, le diversità. Another suggestion is when it's not a magic one, when we're touching these controversial issues, to be careful about the depth and narrative depth. And this is also another way to come down from the tower to look at the details, the accounts of life lived, the concrete experience also, which then helps to humanize also our discussions, especially when there are perspectives which are very different. So my students say that this method helps quite a bit in not feeling alone, above all in the world of teaching by Zoom, but also when we hope it'll soon that we're able to return to this environment where we can also have this physical contact, but the same that helps them to see one another and then to feel that they are seen. So if they give these tasks for reflection, they know that they're not just papers on my desk. They're also the bricks to build together our lesson. And they know that I'm waiting for it if I don't receive it by 9 in the morning, this task, where is it? Because we need precisely to build together this lesson. So it gives a sense of involvement as well. So narrative, and then the other dimension, which we might be able to talk about more in depth, is to encourage them to develop like a skill, cognitive empathy. Understand that it's not that we have to always find the capacity of emotional empathy. We're not able to at times to feel that we're with the other, even if it's important to try to cultivate this. But this listening in order to understand, and then at times we have some concrete exercises on this as well, also to understand what's in play for the other. What is it that the other sees? So this walking together, not just the educator with the student, but helping the students to walk one with the other and to enter in the world of the other as much as possible, recognizing limitations. So then there would also be concrete exercises to help in this way, but with the spirit, which is our moments together in class are for this objective and to understand, to help them to understand that all of these are not just to become deep human beings attentive to the world, but also their professional skills, which then will help them in their work, in all of their relationships, but all the work depend on this kind of skill. So I'm going to stop here. I think I'm on time, but with gratitude for this possibility to talk together. Thank you for listening. Also for Federico for this meditation, marvelous meditation that opened up our outlook very widely. Thanks very much, Professor. Thank you for your many suggestions that I invite reflection by our listeners to then pose further questions to understand this further. Now we're reaching the conclusion of this panel of talks with Dr. Maria Teresa Siniscalco that I welcome now. Dr. Siniscalco is a collaborator with Rimbalzi as an expert, where earlier she was National Project Manager for Studies in 2003 at PISA. She worked as a senior researcher with the Data Processing Center in Hamburg. And she worked with scientific relationships in the educational field for international organizations in Italian, like UNESCO and two others. She gave education courses and a master's level course at the University of Rome and the Polytechnical Institute of Milan. And she carries on an activity as a formator in the field of school with teachers and school administrators. She has a degree in philosophy. She has a doctorate in experimental education at the University of Wisdom Sapienza in Rome. And she's a collaborator in different publications, including International Evaluation in Italian Schools. Thank you, Doctor, for being here with us. And I leave the microphone, the word to you. Thank you, Irene, for this introduction. I thank you for this invitation, in particular, Professor Joseph Milan. I'm very happy to be with you today, virtually at Sofia. And thanks, really thank you, Federico and Amy, for these reflections, because they shared with us part of their journey to pick up the metaphor, Federico's metaphor, and they also shared with us a bit how we work with intercultural education and the education of intercultural dimension for peace at Sofia. So on these very rich talks, there'd be a lot to talk about. I just dwell on 3 points. I would just focus on 3 points. Then I would like to conclude with a question addressed instead to all of us participants. So the first point in the report by Federico is the relationship between going out and walking and renewing our outlook. The second point has to do with the importance of the experiential dimension in intercultural education. It's present both in what Federico said as well as what Amy said. The third point regards the idea of room in which the encounter comes about, which is room or space that has to be built together by the educator, which seems to me one of the points at the heart of what Amy said to us. So I'll begin from the first point. Federico immersed us in this image of the journey, the walk, which has a strong educational value. Educating is like drawing out the person from the place in which they usually are, which, among other things, is a place where the perception and judgment, he was talking about a pre-knowledge, preconcepts, are limited by my past experience. And therefore, drawing the person out so that they can put themselves on the way and expose themselves to what's new and what's different, which is contained in reality. One of the fruits of this walking, and Federico was saying, is that our outlook changes. And what came to my mind are many examples of this relationship between going out and walking and changing the point of view, precisely in the educational field. And I would like to quote what's very known from the Erasmus Project. So the Erasmus Project is a name. Erasmus is a name. It's the name of the humanist of the Renaissance. He was at Rotterdam, but he was also, which translated into Italian, it's a European program for mobility of university students. So walking mobility. So what is the idea at the basis of the Erasmus program, as with all of the initiatives in which a period of time is spent, a pretty substantial bit of time to study and live in another country? The idea is that this doesn't only help to learn another language, but also to learn to live with people from different cultures, to live together, live with. In this regard, I would like to offer to you an experience in some measure, it's personal, that is a reflection that our youngest daughter made when she got back from China, where she had wanted to spend a year before beginning university. And then a year that was interrupted after 6 months because of the beginning of the pandemic. And her intention was that of taking a year to do something for the others, to offer her time, and also to discover a culture that's different from ours. So at the end, talking with my Chinese students who were about to finish up the high school, she said, what I experienced this year is that to enter into a new culture, we need to put aside all the prejudices that we have and that we encounter in the world around us and in the media, and with the mental openness to try to understand it, this culture. Because if you think about it, what you consider to be normal, in reality, it's only that you're used to in the environment in which you have grown up. To try to understand a new culture, living together with people, in reality, is the opportunity to discover another way of looking at the world that could have been yours if you had been born there. This understanding gives us the possibility to have a wider vision, multicultural vision of reality. So to try to understand a new culture is the opportunity to discover another way of looking at the world. So it seems to me these words are precisely, they bear witness to that idea which that Federico was saying is coming out, this moving elsewhere with respect to one's own habitual world and also one's own habitual way of seeing things. And it makes it possible to widen the outlook and to recognize that one's own point of view is one of the possible points of view and that there are many others. Of course, it's not necessary to go to the another place in the world. What's transformative is the vital encounter with the other and with his culture or her culture. This is the first point. The second point, the importance of the experiential dimension. Federico was saying how the author that was offered to us, Michel de Certeau, was dealing with seeing things from on high, from the tower, from a detached point of view, which makes reality appear to be flat. In other words, two-dimensional. And instead, walking. Walking as an experience in which I'm immersed in reality that I'm involved in with all of myself. And the journey, the itinerary that Amy offers to her students seems to me focused on precisely on the experience of dialogue. In other words, it's not in play the transmission of content, but the experience of how precisely in the interaction with the other, which can be enlightening, also to be able to read the reality in which those burning issues are viewed. The experience has a particular resonance precisely in intercultural education. In this regard, I would like to recall several bits of data which were recently recalled. Bringing the experiential dimension is fundamental to help young people to develop global competence, what was defined as global competence. And in this global competence, as how is it defined? What is this global competence? It's the capacity to examine in a critical way the relevant, big, significant problems on a local, global level and intercultural level, those issues that Amy dealt with in her seminar, and tried to understand and appreciate the point of view of the others, the capacity for that cognitive empathy that you were talking about, and the capacity to make a commitment open with the others. It's open and respectful among people of different cultures. And then the capacity to act in a responsible way for the well-being of everyone and the development, sustainable development. In other words, that last point that you were saying at Federico was saying, that committing oneself with the reality, that acting in the reality. So in this global competence, there are cognitive aspects, there are social, emotional aspects, and then aspects of mediation. In 2018, Lux pulled together data on the global competence of students in 27 countries. And these data were published at the end of 2020. And among the many things that come out, it emerges that what moves attitudes the most, in other words, what really helps us to move our outlook, is being involved and committed in experiences, intercultural experiences. And always what's given in these studies, it shows that schools can still grow in this, because by now we're very careful to transmit ideas and knowledge on intercultural dimension. whereas it's more difficult to provide learning cases of really experiential to help people participate in these experiences. So the school and the students learn many things about other cultures, whereas more rarely do they participate in events that celebrate the cultural diversity. And therefore, the importance of this experiential dimension of journeying, of being involved, committed, and dialogue, to have conversations, sincere conversations, as they were called. And at this point, I come to the third point. The third point is that the experience of the encounter or dialogue with the other comes about in space. And this space is created, it's projected, it's planned out, it's contained, it's held, contained by the educator. What do I mean by this? When your talk, Amy, you talked about what you do and in the seminars to prepare the terrain for dialogue. You told us what you do during the encounter with the care of for, for quality, attention to care, the quality of the exchange, of the presence, the values of dialogue that you emphasize, the choice to work on narration, on the stories. And then all of this contributes to create room for the encounter. Because the space that the encounter comes about is not just space that's linked to visible things, physical space, but it's also connected with less visible aspects, which, however, are just as important: psychological space, emotional space, social space, intercultural space, ethical space. And from what you said, you can see how in the work there's this planning that's attentive and intentional in this space where the encounter comes about. It seems to me that the intention that guides the creation of this space is that of creating a sure, safe space, a safe space in which we go beyond fear of exposing ourselves, the fear to really encounter the other, fear to converse in a sincere way, creating a safe space in which we can listen to the other to understand them, not so much to convince them, but in the first place to understand them. And therefore, all of the work that comes before, during, and perhaps also afterwards, I deduce, puts the basis there so that the encounter dialogue comes about in this kind of space here. And with regard precisely to the role of the educator in creating the space of relationship, there's another data that emerges from these studies by Lux on the global ability of the student. It's the importance of the attitude, interior attitude of the teacher, and therefore the consistency between what the teacher says and what he does and lets transpire also in his behavior, his conduct. So did we draw out this data? The students were asked if they thought that their teacher had negative opinions on some cultural groups, or else if he were to have a negative vision of the history of certain cultural groups, or else just alone if he had lower expectations with respect to students from some cultural groups. And what we saw is that there is a correlation, significant correlation between the attitudes, discriminating attitudes of the teachers where they're present and that of the student. In other words, the students who perceive that their teachers have attitudes of discrimination tend as well to have less respect with regard to people of other cultures. And this same correlation, besides everything else, there is between the attitude of parents and that of their children. And therefore, the attitude and behavior of the teachers is very important in forming people who are open to cultural differences. And this leads us to recognize the essential role of the educator. It's a role that's more important than oftentimes we may perceive, which is often recognized. It's more important than the physical environment, the school, the various technologies that we talk so much about, because what makes a difference and then is translated into a way of organizing physical space and utilizing technology. What that makes a difference is precisely the fact that the educators hold some space that's permeated by the culture of relationship. So 3 points, going out and going towards the other leads to putting aside and widening our outlook, is going towards the other to be really such, to renew the outlook. We have to have an experiential dimension that and be committed, involved, head, heart, and hands. And ultimately, the educator has a fundamental role, starting out from his interior attitude, in order to build and keep the space of the relationship. I hope that I too have not have be confusing, and I thank you for listening. And I would like to conclude by offering you a question, from offering it to all of you, and to take for a moment of reflection, to respond, to write on pen and paper on our answer, and then possibly share it in the chat. In this case, we'll break the rule of not using the chat to write. We can write in the chat our answers, condensing them in just 2, 3 keywords or a very brief sentence. The question is this: considering my experience, what occurred whereby a situation of diversity with another, diversity of opinion, diversity of sensitivity, diversity of ways of doing things, that it became an opportunity to make it become a chance to widen the outlook and deepen, acquire a better understanding of the relationship. So thinking of considering my experience, what occurred whereby a situation of diversity with another became a chance to widen the outlook and acquire a better understanding of the relationship? This is the question. It was already put in the chat. Let's take a minute to answer, to look for this situation. So a moment of silence, and then we can try to write our answer, and whoever wants is also invited to put it and put it in the chat. Maybe we finish. Whoever wants, and they can share. I'm trying to put myself in the other's shoes, the other's position, place, an attitude. I listen, entering into the other. When I decided to listen to the other all the way. In my indigenous culture, we live, I am the other. The serious listening to the other. I don't want to take the chance of reading. Recognizing that the other is different from me. I don't know if they're also in the YouTube chat, if there are some answers. The desire to reach a common objective for a common good and the awareness of not being able to make it there alone. With Maria Teresa, there is something also in the chat of the YouTube channel. I'll read it for you. The desire to understand deeply what the other felt, and again, unity and listening to the other, putting oneself in parentheses in a sense. Here, there's also when I was able to listen in humility to consider that the other has something to tell me. Humility is one of the conditions for dialogue, as Paulo Freire delineated. Love for the world and for men and community is humility. It's a second condition that he puts. Entering in the other and apologizing without thinking of what happened. It gives us the joy to be able to understand the other as he or she is. It's important to lose one's own ideas. When room for freedom is opened up, interior freedom to be able to listen without judgment, not judging and listening to the motivations of the other. Reciprocal love creates a safe space, trying to look at things from the point of view of the other, putting myself in his or her shoes. With the presence of God among us and the staff, we're able to start over again from the top if nothing had happened. For me as well, thinking always that no one is superior to the others. Thank you. Thank you for the sharing. Perhaps it can also be a starting point for picking up and studying the points. Your talks were so rich, Federico and Amy. Surely there are some points starting out from these answers that go in depth. And then, of course, there'll be questions. So I thank you. And I'll turn the microphone off. Thank you, Dr. Siniscalco, also for this having involved right from the start our listeners. I think it was very important. Now we initiate our session for questions. For I just remind you the way to do it. For those who are among the spectators on Zoom, it'll be possible to write your questions in the section set aside for questions and answers, or else raise your hand and on the Zoom, and the staff will give you the microphone, and you can directly pose your question. This method is also offered. We encourage the people who are on the stage at the Zoom who will not be able to write in their own section, but we invite them to speak, say the word personally. Then for those who are following us by YouTube, it'll be possible to write the questions and they will be read. So now they tell me that there are already some questions from the YouTube channel. So I give the word to Valentina, who will read the first question. No, there are questions in the chat. Sorry. The other Valentina can read them. Okay. Now we'll read the question. Hello, everyone. This is a response in English. He says, humility, it's important to accept the others as they are. Sometimes the difference can cause conflict, but accepting others' perspectives, which is different from mine, becomes a gift and not a contradiction against me. All right. Thank you very much for having shared this response. Therefore, I also invite the spectators, if they have questions, to pose them. Maybe I could also make a comment on this. I think that one of the challenges in this moment is also the dynamics of power historically. So there are groups, I say from my experience, in the point of view of the US, groups which were historically in a position of being those who, in different dynamics. So I think we need to dig very deep on the part of the teachers in this work of creating room, which we are careful, attentive, not only to the interpersonal dynamics, but also the historical dynamics among the groups and who's quiet and who speaks. So there is this sentence about safe space, creating a safe space, but also the problem that at times, if the room is too safe, we don't take any chances to enter, perhaps in the more turbulent waters, just to indicate that the work of creating room where it's possible to take risks, chances, to entering into the historical wounds, coming out together with a little bit more resilience in this setting. I think that it gives a depth to the work of humility that invites us to a very complex tension. I don't know if it's clear, but maybe someone else would like to add something on this. Thanks very much, Professor. In anticipation of questions coming in from our spectators, I wanted to pose a question, perhaps also briefly, to all three of you. Could say a word on this, thinking of the time that we are living in teaching. It's all done through the platform, and the lack of room in the relationship are important. The environment is important. What is the importance of the effective dimension to reappropriate this room? How can we revive them in the relationship? So, you want to say something, Maria Teresa? Okay. So I'll go ahead. So I also apologize. I had a very brief blackout with the connection, but I'm back. Well, I think that the question of room for formation in particular is absolutely central in this moment of being put aside. Let's say that's forced movement, all the courses of formation online, and those that are called digital space, with a kind of a formula that takes us off track. It's not really space, because space, we can take care of them. It's an essential dimension of formation, take care of space, room, and take care of the place in which we live. Whereas the digital space, it's difficult to take care of that. If we think, for example, now what comes to mind is all of the difficulty that there is, and this is really intercultural because it's the same all over the world, in learning to manage the communication on the social network. It's a very difficult room to manage. And that's why we really struggle to take care of that. And that's why I believe that this moment is, there's a great possibility besides a great difficulty in this moment. In other words, the possibility to become aware how much physical space are essential in the course of formation. A bit now, what comes to my mind, because I really recently read this very brief book written by three anthropologists from Turin. It's entitled The World That You Will Have. There are brief reflections, anthropological reflections on the pandemic. And a beautiful suggestion which came back to my mind now was precisely seen from the point of view of anthropology, the topic of interruption in many cultures. There are rites that interrupt, almost all of them, they interrupt the ordinary time and they make it possible to start over again a new time that's renewed. So that's what Lent does. Now Ramadan for our Muslim friends does exactly this, which also this pandemic could be, if it's grasped in the right way, a kind of interruption and start over again with a new outlook. For example, with the awareness of how important it is to take care of the environments that we live in, the space that we live in, which, however, is an opportunity that should be grasped. It's not going to be automatic for anybody. Not for anybody will it be automatic to enter into a classroom or to re-enter into a hall and to enter with a new spirit. It's a journey, a trip that has to be done. You know, that little by little, at least in Italy, we'll begin to see a bit of opening. I think it's a journey. It's essential, but in which nothing is for sure. Thanks very much. Thank you. And always in this journey that you already introduced at the beginning, and we come back. If you want to answer yourselves, Dr. Siniscalco or Professor Ullman, we're very happy to hear your opinion. Very briefly, I connect with what Federico said because I very much agree that this moment of crisis, of being overwhelmed, many have said it, there's also a great opportunity. In the case of the world of school, we talk about how it will be going back to what's normal. And we talk about a new normal, the idea of not going back to where we were before. But deep down, we're already there in this situation of discomfort. And what came to mind is the other dimension, which is that of dialogue, of going through the crisis, disagreement, the capacity also to stay in the moment of crisis, in the moment of disagreement. There is a educator, a psychoeducator, Daniele Novato, he's Italian, at the Center for Psychoeducation. It emphasizes how important it is to stay in a moment of discomfort, in a moment of conflict, and this moment is a moment of crisis, in such a way that so that the passage afterwards is a passage that's enriched, so that it's, as Federico was saying earlier, taking care afterwards to be more aware of what there is when we're in a direct relationship. Therefore, deep down, really reflecting on this moment that we're going through and feeling, staying in the discomfort and all of the difficulty and the suffering that it entails for the students, for those who teach, for everyone, to be able to really go out, come out having, being enriched by what this situation teaches us. Thank you. Thank you. If Professor Ullman wants to say something yourself, I think that It's also a moment for recognizing deeply the limitations, to reflect. We had difficulty in my lessons, misunderstandings. And I was saying, it's like we're in the last mile to reach the top of Mount Everest, and we're without food, without clothes to keep warm, without water. It was also a moment of recognizing deeply there are limitations in the levels of trust that we can reach in this platform, and to accept with serenity, also knowing that we're trying to do as well as we can, and a moment also of pulling out all of the mercy that we have in our heart, one for the other, for the mistakes that we make. So I think that I find myself reflecting what is essential of meeting when we meet in person, when we get back again, in such a way that education does become a something that's entirely transactional. I think that it's an opportunity to reflect very deeply, not only on the possibilities, but also on the deep limitations. Thanks very much. Thank you. Now we have a comment on the YouTube channel that will be read, and then a question from the Zoom spectators. So we'll read the questions sub, subsequently, and then we'll leave you room to answer. So here in the YouTube channel, there are two brief comments which came in. Pierre writes, I fear that it's utopian to think that problems like racism in the US or the Uyghur in China can be resolved only with dialogue. It's not a problem of knowledge, it's a problem of conflict of interest. And then instead, Maria's Gracias, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, she writes, welcome the other as he is, knowing that if I were in his place and I had his same formation, perhaps I too would behave in that way, or I would have that opinion. Maybe I could begin just to say that I'm completely in agreement. Dialogue is not a magic pill, and there are strong limitations. So in this also, for example, I begin my lesson on conflicts, social conflicts, religion, morality inside of it, with a reading of by Martin Luther King Jr., his letter from a Birmingham jail. It says the same thing, that we need to go in depth and grasp the demands, the prophecies for justice also inside of these conflicts. And at the same time, being strategic in the common communication choices to bring ahead changes that are serious. So in my opinion, we need to make all of these discussions grasping, taking in also all the deep work that's done for economic justice, racial justice. We need to put together also all of this work for justice inside of these talks that we give. Otherwise, we damage in not recognizing the depth of the conflicts and the work that we need to do for justice to heal these breaks, these ruptures. I fully agree. Regarding this is the question. One goal of the social network is polarization of opinion to keep the person active. Unfortunately, this way of discussing present also in the environments, learning environments? How can we widen the outlook for a dialogue, enriching dialogue, and at the same time promote a debate and a critical thought without getting stuck in a disagreement? Look, it's a beautiful question, effectively. The problem is big. I would say that what comes to my mind is to answer with a verse from Rumi, the Persian poet of the 13th century, who says, beyond the ideas of what is just or right to do and that which is mistaken, there is a field. I will meet you there. In other words, the English, beyond right thinking, beyond wrong thinking, there is a field. I will meet you there. In other words, at a certain point, as an outfit, a habit, of dialogue, we need to go beyond the idea of understanding who is right and who's wrong, to encounter, meet one another in a terrain which is beyond this, which is that of the welcoming the person. And then what Piero was saying earlier, I think is very correct. The problems are a conflict of interest. Therefore, that which on a certain level, when we come out maybe from our seminar, our class, the problems are a conflict of interest. The challenge that we have in front of us is that of, it's posed to us also by Pope Francis, that is, it's a change of mentality, mindset. Till now, we've gone ahead for good or bad with the mindset focused on the ego and the self. We need to widen this mentality. We need to change it to reach a mentality that's focused on us, where this we is not just another little group, interest group, but it is humanity. Because if we don't grasp this challenge, we'll all go straight into a wall. The other element that I would add also is to question in a practical way, where is the place to encourage this work, critical work? So it's not always in the hall with everyone to put against a wall, one has to take a step. So there are different ways of giving feedback, of having a conversation, also in Zoom and during office hours, a personal conversation. So also to be creative, if there is a clash, a difficulty, the student is struggling to take a deep step, to question all the possibilities, for care, attention to the place in which you feel that you can go more in greater, as much depth as possible. I think there's another thing that to think seriously, because at times if we put someone against a wall in the hall in front of everyone, or that they're ashamed, it doesn't help them to take that very deep step, which maybe they could make in another context. But at the same time, we need to also take care of the hall and the experience of all the students to be able, the way that the conflicts are coming out. So it's a very delicate dance of discernment on the part of the professor to question where's the best place to help not just this person to take a step, but for the entire group to understand that a work in depth needs to be made to them. I just add a final comment. I believe very much to try to go beyond this logic of counterposition, which unfortunately, whether we want to or not, we all fall into it, because the way of digital communication we all live goes more or less in different ways, but we all live them. I believe that it's essential to recover, bring attention back to the informal moments, because they're the ones where the digital communication is flattened out. Because when I communicate through a digital tool, I communicate in a standard way. I write my sentence, I write 3 sentences, I send them, and then it ends there until the other doesn't answer me. Or if I want, I turn off the screen, I turn off my phone, and the conversation ends. Whereas very often, at least in my experience, those moments of breakthrough, of a step ahead in the relationship and in the confrontation, often they come about in those moments of between moments between one thing after the lessons class is over, the moment is over in which I'm putting my foot outside the class, I hear a half a word, which in reality opens up a world for me because that person had not spoken. Instead, inside it comes out. Or else, having expressed an opinion which is particularly strong and violent, however, at the end of the lesson, hearing something or speaking in the hallway, it comes out that that violent reaction has a history behind it. This dimension here, which is clearly in digital communication, cannot be there. I think it's one of the places that we have to start from again, over again. Thanks very much. I thank everyone because now we're approaching the conclusion. I think that it was a very rich and enriching seminar. Therefore, I thank, besides our guests, once more, our whole staff, the direction, management, and especially the translators who gave us the chance to follow in different places in the world. And I invite you for the next webinar, which will be held on May 28th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Italian time. In a short while, you'll see the banner with the details. And with this invitation, we greet one another and we look forward to seeing you at the next appointment. Thank you and have a good evening.